let's now so we're looking at things like values and equality, equity, and so on. We looked at the legal dimension to it, the ethical dimension. But this is not the only two dimensions involved in these notions. So look at the just economic dimension. Equality, equity, despite the confusion, let's say equity, I use that as a foundation. What is the economic dimension in it? Now, if you are studying economic theories in the first bachelor's, your second lesson probably will be about what is called rational decision theory, social decision theory. They'll tell you about how decisions affect economic behavior. Very broadly formulated. Okay. Now imagine this is how these economic reflections begin and continue. They say, let's imagine as an organization or a social system where we give incentives to people according to the differential needs they have. Because equity has to do with differential needs and responding to individual differential needs. So, as a result, they find that responding to it would mean, in some senses actually, contradicting the idea of equity itself. They make differential outcomes equal. Like, for example, you come from, let's say, reserved category, your performance is the same as, let's say, 40% marks is the same as 90% marks, 95% marks from a general category. Because the reserved category comes from depressed classes, oppressed classes, have differential needs, and so on. Fine, let's accept that. What happens as a result? That's what your economic theory will tell you, that you have an incentive not to put in a great deal of effort to get the result which you will get without it. Now, it is extremely rational that when you can get the same result with less effort, and that greater effort will not in any way improve, you have no incentive to put in a great deal of effort. It is very rational. So, somebody from the research category, being the rational person he or she is, feels that you don't have to bend your back to learn, because either you'll get a seat or you'll get a promotion or you'll get a job anyway without doing it. So, if the reserved category is a rational person, he will have incentives not to learn. This is one side of the story. Let's look at the other side of the story, namely, a general category person. He knows or she knows that, assuming he's not the most brilliant person or she's not the most brilliant person on earth, can only get 90-95%, never go beyond it, no matter how hard the person works, knows that no matter how much effort is put in, the result is not, the outcome is not what is desired. That is to say, he or she also has no incentive to work hard and learn, because the result is the same. So in such a society, in such a system, incentive is given to those, or incentive not to those, incentive is given not to put in hard work, not to learn. So when a society or an organization incentivizes this, the consequences to the organization is nothing short of catastrophic, because you'll be breeding incompetence. You'll be breeding ignorance. So, your intention might be excellent, namely, help people, oppressed, depressed, other backward classes and so on. Lift them up, very good. But the result can only be catastrophic because continuous incentive is given to be inefficient, incompetent. To one, no matter how competent you are, you won't get it. To the other, no matter how incompetent you are, you're going to get it. This is what economic theory tells you. This is what you should have learned in the second lesson of economic theory in the first bachelor's. I don't know whether they teach you that. I don't know whether UGC even allows such curriculum to be formulated. But this is normally the kind of education you should get. So therefore, simply talking and shouting from the rooftops with moral values won't help. Legally, we have seen. Ethically, we have seen. Now we see economical catastrophe. All you have to do is today look at the Indian education system, Indian bureaucratic organizations. They are collapsing, increasing inefficiency, incompetence, and so on and so forth. So this is a necessary but logical consequences in society when you pursue these policies. So what UGC is telling you, what Indian government is telling you, Indian governments, because Congress, BJP here, it makes no difference, the same story, is this. Our societies, our administrations, our organizations must collapse, even though they think they're building it. They are not. They're destroying it. Now, of course, you might ask, how is it possible that they don't know what the first bachelor student should know? Well, maybe we should look at how teachers are recruited by the UGC, the rules they have put in as to who should teach. That'll give you some idea of why students are not learning this, if they're not learning it. This is the economic dimension. We looked at the legal dimension, ethical dimension, economic dimension. Let's look at the political dimension. Same equity. We want equity in India. We want equity, says the UGC. You see, equity is, of course, why equity? Because it will help us build a just society. In other words, it is part of either the meaning of justice or a cluster of concepts which clarify justice. So, all right. But then, of course, the question is, what? Forget equity. If you say it's part of justice, both concepts require clarification. What would it involve? So if you look at political theory, which has done quite a bit of effort, which has put in quite a bit of effort to understand the theories of justice, especially since the 1970s, when a famous man wrote a book called A Theory of Justice. He had already written a few articles on it, and it's quite a well-known, highly respected work. Now, of course, when you realize that in 1970 such a book had to be written, that tells you that until then there was very great deal of unclarity, or there were lots of debates and discussions about what justice is, because the book is about theory of justice, it was called. And the debate continues, discussion continues. So we do know what are the things which we should not add to justice, but we still are not very clear about what justice is. Now, unfortunately, we make it more complicated in India. First of all, we don't know what justice is, we don't know what it means, we don't know what it involves, we don't know how to get it. And in fact, if you look at ancient Greece, you found that people wanted justice there too, but they found the laws were the means of, mode of getting or finding justice, discovering justice, because they found neither the divine laws nor human laws are just. So in other words, it was an attempt to seek it through law. So the idea that laws must be just and so on is actually a bit of a problem when you take these ideas from where we draw most of our thinking. And what happened in the Middle Ages with Christianity, I will leave it aside for the moment, but let's come to India. We use two words. We talk in English about social justice, and we talk in Indian languages about Samaja Nyaya, and some people also speak of Samajika Nyaya, and quite few others think that they are synonyms, they are identical in meaning, Samaja Nyaya, Samajika Nyaya. And the problem is this: the word Nyaya in India and Indian languages do not translate justice, cannot translate justice. What they do is, they mean, because Indians have developed, not just given some definition, developed ideas and theories about Nyaya. Nyaya means basically reasoning. So, but we use it as a translation of the word justice. In any case, if we continue with that idea of justice as Nyaya, Samaja Nyaya means something is what is prevalent in society or what you learn in society, one of the two. And Samajika Nyaya is what is there in any given society at any given time. That's the Samajika. So, that you learn something from society, to reason, for example, that how you reason in a given society at a given time, they are completely two different things. Now, even if you want to make them identical and call them social justice, when we don't even know what justice is, how will we know what social justice is? So, but programs are made. Our directive principles are about that in the Constitution. We talk as though we do understand social justice, and it is very revealing, historically, to realize that this idea, the word itself, social justice, emerges in the late 19th century, formulated by a person who was going to become the subsequent Pope, and the idea was, in Latin, they titled it as Rerum Novarum, which clarified, developed, introduced the idea of social justice. And why did the Pope do it? Because socialist trade unions, at that moment quasi-Marxist trade unions, were beginning to dominate European societies. So as a counterweight to that, to these political movements and trade unions, the Vatican developed the idea of social justice. Until then it didn't exist. Now, here's the extraordinary thing. In the Constitutional Assembly debates, about which I have written, there's a lot of discussion, not really a lot of discussion, a lot of people expressing opinions about the preamble of the Constitution, which is also embodied in the directive principles about social justice. Now, of course, there's no one social justice. Economic justice, social justice, political justice, and so on and so forth. Cultural justice, Vijayalakshmi Pandit spoke about that. I have no clue what it means, so please don't ask me. So there are different justices are bandied around. Social justice is also one such. They distinguished economic and political from social justice. Fine. Now here is a problem. A problem is, when the directive principles talk about this, when Constituent Assembly members talk about this, social justice that is, there's only just one idea, story about social justice that comes from the Roman Catholic Church. Now, it is not possible to accuse, it would also be unfair, to accuse the members of the Constitutional Assembly to have been all disguised Catholics. They were not. But it would be unfair because they had not read this document either. So to accuse them that they were secret agents of the Vatican, unfair because they couldn't have read it. But I'm sure they picked up the word because it was floating around, which is not a great thing. So when Indian Constituent Assembly members debated, or rather expressed their opinions on social justice, they didn't know what it meant, what it could have meant. So however did they embody, if you like, how can the Indian Constitution embody, whether as a directive principle or as a preamble, something they had no way of understanding, of which they had no understanding? Now, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, they may want to understand social justice, and they use the word, an aspirational expression, as they say. It's an aspiration of the Indian Constitutional Assembly, Constituent Assembly to understand social justice. Fine, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that. But unfortunately, nobody has produced a theory of social justice in India thereafter. So, not only do we use something which we don't understand, not only do we use policies to defend something we don't understand, not only do we make slogans that we don't understand, the only understanding that exists of social justice is a Christian understanding, and we use it. Now, when I say that it is a contribution of the Vatican or the Pope, I want to draw your attention not to the fact it is Christian alone, but to focus on something more important, which is, you see, in that period, as I said already, growth of trade union movements, social democratic movements, quasi-revolutionary movements, Marxism and so on, they were growing. And most of them were basically atheistic movements, materialistic movements as the church saw it. So social justice was seen as the Christian counterweight, Christian alternative to these materialistic, scientific, atheistic movements who wanted to improve conditions of people in societies. That's also when the Christians started setting up Christian trade unions. It's the same, trades unions, it's the same movement. Now, because it was Christian, this document, Rerum Novarum, the way it evolved, developed the idea of Christian society, Christian not in the religious sense, in terms of ameliorating poverty and so on of people in society, in Christian societies, it required very deep appeal to the relation between God and man, God meaning how Jesus Christ appeared on earth and what he did, and human beings who are sinners. So, and of course, what a state is, etc., what a society is, which is a very old thinking in Christian thought. So, the whole attempt was to give it a foundation in anthropology, religious anthropology of the relation between God and man and society and state. So, this is what social justice was, this is what social justice is, and when Indians appropriated it, unlike what I spoke a bit earlier in one of the fragments, copy-pasting, they copy-pasted parts of the law. What in Constituent Assembly debates show us is that people did not copy-paste the document produced by the Vatican, they copy-pasted the word, social justice, which we continue to do today. Now, copy-pasting perhaps as such is not bad in this case, so one would have expected that those who spoke about it, those who wrote directive principles on it, would also tell us what is social justice if it is not Christian. What is social justice if the God-man relationship is not there? What is social justice if you're atheistic? And so on, secular, and so on. Now, nobody has done that, but everyone talks about social justice. Copy-pasting the word, it goes even one step further than what we discovered when we talked about law and copy-pasting parts of law to create new statutes, new legislations. This is about the political dimension of equity and equality and justice.